"I'm out of here," I declared. "Fine, and don't bother coming back," my wife shot back. Normally, I'd hurl a go to hell as I stormed out, but today I opted for a more civilized farewell. Over our 14 years together, we've exchanged similar barbs, but this time, I'm not planning to make a return visit. She'll understand what I meant soon enough. Over the last 6 months or so, Emily, my wife, had turned into a verbal wrecking ball. I couldn't figure out why. Her sharp words, to put it mildly, cut deep. To avoid escalating things, I started dodging her. Every day I'd linger longer in the car, and sometimes I'd sneak back home after Emily and Sophie, our 13-year-old, had finished dinner. I needed to look after myself. Occasionally, there'd be leftovers waiting for me. Lately, though, it seems they disappeared before I got back. I go by Mark Kowalski. Technically, it's David Mark Kowalski, but since my dad's also named David, they called me Mark from the start to avoid confusion. No, I'm not a junior. My dad is David Ethan Kowalski. I've never understood why he skipped the junior label. I'd have been fine with junior or even DJ, but no, it's just Mark or Nita. Yep, I'm Polish. Or at least I have Polish roots. I've heard all the jokes, well, most of them. New ones keep cropping up every year. As the only Pole I know in this town of 10,000, apart from my dad, I've become a walking punchline. Technically, I'm half Polish. The other half is German, French, Irish, and English from my mom's side. But since I'm a Kowalski, I'm labeled as Polish. My soon-to-be ex-wife isn't who I thought she was. I only found out about it 4 weeks ago. I'd been keeping my distance due to her behavior. After a few dinners, when I went missing one Monday night, I ended up at a diner. While waiting in a booth to place my order, I overheard 2 guys in the next booth talking. I caught a phrase about a Pole and tuned in. "So how long have you been with the Paulus, missus? Since they tied the knot?" one of them said. "Heck, I even slept with her on their wedding day, and he's clueless." The first voice was unfamiliar, but the second, I recognized it immediately. It was my best friend, Tom Carey. I froze. They kept talking, but I heard nothing until Tom revealed, "Yeah, we meet at least twice a month. Mark's so clueless, he doesn't even suspect." I was struck dumb. Just then, the waitress came to take my order. Quietly, I said, "Sorry, I've got to go," and bolted, making sure they didn't spot me. I couldn't wrap my head around it. Emily, my wife, with my closest friend, the guy who stood by me at the altar. He's also my go-to mechanic, and that won't change anytime soon. Well, he's not officially my mechanic. More like an exclusive contractor I rely on for fixing and inspecting all my cars. In case you're wondering, I run a used car dealership. Yep, I'm a used car salesman. I've heard all the jokes and jabs, but my business is thriving. People trust that they're getting top-quality cars at fair prices, and if any issues come up, I handle them. Tom has always been an excellent mechanic, and I keep him busy and well compensated. I wanted to bring him on staff, but he joked about not respecting himself if he worked for a Pole. He said it in jest, but I could tell he meant it. Still, I hired him as an independent contractor, though he wasn't very independent. The truth is, I'm his only income source, and that will be his downfall. Leaving the diner, I cruised the streets, doubting what I'd heard. Was it true, or just Tom boasting? They might have hired a PI, but if what he said was accurate, their meetings were infrequent. It might be a waste of money. Still, I decided to snoop through Emily's phone and email. Back home, Emily was her usual self. Fine by me. I needed the truth before confronting her. Once she was asleep, I checked her email. It was clean. Her phone was locked, but it didn't take me long to crack it with our daughter's birth date. I found a few suspicious messages, but nothing from Tom. His name in her contacts wasn't surprising, considering he's my friend. Maybe he was just talking trash, I thought. Yet her recent behavior suggested something was off. Perhaps not with Tom, but with someone else. I went to bed feeling restless. It was past 2:43 a.m. when I finally fell asleep. The next day at the dealership, Tom cracked his usual Polish jokes. I usually let them slide, but today I snapped. "Tom, what do you even know about Poland? Bet you couldn't find it on a map if your life depended on it. You joke about Poles being dim, but I'm sure they could locate the U.S., maybe even our state. Get to work." Tom stared at me, stunned. He knew I was onto something. He wasn't book smart, more street savvy and good with engines, which is why we hung out in high school. I helped him with his studies so he could graduate. Now I'm reconsidering our friendship. He got me thinking about choosing a spouse. I retreated to my office, shut the door, and pondered how to gather evidence. Confronting them both directly wouldn't work. They'd just brush it off. I needed solid proof. I called a PI in Santa Fe and laid out my concerns. He said monitoring them would be costly, given their sporadic meetings. You could slap a tracker on her phone to know where she is, or set up cameras at home. But unless they're high quality and expensive, there's a chance they'll be spotted. Even with top-notch gear, if she's alert, she might catch on. If I were you, I'd put a tracker on her phone and hope to catch them in the act, the private investigator advised. He suggested a tracking program and offered it free of charge, saying, "Consider this a gift. The information I gave you is available online anyway, but you've still received some useful advice." "I appreciate that, but I'll send a check anyway," I insisted. "If you're ever in Silver City, come by Kowalski's lot," he offered. "I don't usually go that way, but if I do, I'll make sure to visit," I replied, sensing he was genuine. A significant part of my success in sales comes from making people feel valued. I've learned that people crave recognition. I decided to go with the tracking software to save both money and the hassle of installing cameras Emily might notice. That night, when everyone was asleep, I quietly installed the tracking app on Emily's phone, syncing it with mine. It would run invisibly in the background. Finally, I managed to get a good night's sleep. The next morning at work, I monitored the app closely. Emily worked part-time at the university bookstore, putting in 15 to 20 hours each week. She referred to her earnings as mad money and splurged it at the salon. She visited the grocery store and returned home later. Tom was at home most of the day, but whenever Emily was around, he was out working, so at least for that day, nothing seemed to have happened. That evening, I made an effort to be more pleasant with my wife and daughter, suggesting we go out for dinner. Emily seemed somewhat open to the idea. Our daughter, a typical teenager, hesitated but eventually agreed. The dinner went smoothly. I brought up Tom casually, and Emily grew uncomfortable, quickly changing the topic, which only heightened my suspicions. I need to determine if Tom's statements are accurate. I have to get to the bottom of this. That night, I refrained from checking Emily's phone. My attempts to look at her calls or texts turned up nothing. Either she had deleted them quickly or hadn't made any. As I got into bed, I thanked Emily for dinner. "Thanks for joining us tonight," I said. "Thank you, Mark. It was a pleasant surprise," she replied, meeting my eyes. "You might get lucky tonight. It's been a while," I added, noting our recent lack of intimacy. After her usual routine in the bathroom, Emily settled next to me. I felt conflicted about the prospect of intimacy with her. If she had been unfaithful, did I even want it? I decided to let her take the initiative until I had concrete proof. I wouldn't be the one to start anything. We ended up being intimate, but it was rather mundane. No need for specifics. At least I enjoyed it. Throughout the week, I kept tracking Emily's phone location, finding nothing unusual. On Saturday night, while she slept, I checked her phone again for any messages or calls, but found nothing. I was almost ready to believe that Tom was just bragging, trying to impress someone with his stories of conquests. This wasn't the first time he had exaggerated since our school days. I tossed and turned in bed, unable to sleep. At 2 a.m., I decided to go downstairs for a drink, hoping it would help me relax. With a glass of Jack Daniels and Coke in one hand and her phone in the other, I resolved to check it again. Entering the password, our daughter's birth date, I opened her phone to the home screen. Suddenly, it struck me like a lightning bolt. Our daughter's birth date was significant. Emily's pregnancy had been fraught with difficulties. We had feared losing the baby several times due to complications. There was an issue with Emily's Rh factor, causing her body to reject the baby. She spent the last 3 weeks of her pregnancy on bed rest to ensure a safe delivery. Sophie was born exactly 9 months after our wedding. We were thrilled to have a healthy baby, but she turned out to be a demanding child. She cried constantly, had trouble sleeping, and struggled with breastfeeding. It was a tough time. When Sophie was 2, Emily firmly said we weren't having another child. This disappointed me, but honestly, the baby had drained much of the joy from our lives. I mentioned she was born 9 months after our wedding, often called a wedding night baby, because they're conceived on that night or during the honeymoon. A light bulb went off in my head. If Tom's claims were true, there was a strong chance Emily was already pregnant. Before our wedding night, Emily had been on the pill. No, we didn't wait until marriage to be intimate. It was a significant part of our relationship. The doctor had speculated that the stress of the wedding might have affected her hormones, making the pill ineffective. If the pill failed that night, it likely failed that day too. Now I knew what to do. There's a 50/50th chance I'm not the father. You know the saying, the early bird gets the worm? Well, Tom might have been an early bird, but in this case, it seems the early worm gets the birdie. I got up from the couch and went to the bathroom, where I found some cotton swabs. Sophie was fast asleep in her room. She had finally settled into a decent sleep routine by the age of 4. Before that, it had been a struggle. She lay there, snoring with her mouth open. It was easy to gently swab the inside of her cheek with a Q-tip. She didn't wake up. After sealing the swab in a plastic bag, I did the same for myself. Even if Sophie turned out to be my biological daughter, there were still questions about Emily's faithfulness if she wasn't. But I pushed those thoughts aside for now. Sunday was a day for chores, and we each had our tasks. I spent the day keeping my distance from Emily and Sophie, trying to manage my emotions. I was eager to confirm my suspicions, but was plagued by doubt. "Is something on your mind, Mark?" Emily asked. I needed a quick explanation, so I said, "I'm planning to buy a lot of cars at the upcoming auction to stock up the lot. Money might be tight until I make some sales." "Just don't overextend yourself," she advised, always referring to the business as ours, even though it was really mine. I'd set it up separately to protect my personal finances. Living in a religious community, I didn't want business troubles affecting my personal life. "I'm thinking of paying off the credit cards and keeping just one open to boost our credit," I mentioned. It was a tactic to cover my true intentions. "Do what you think is best," she replied indifferently. Her lack of interest was noted. The idea to use the tracking software was a stroke of genius in hindsight. It would reduce complications if my suspicions turned out to be true. Early Monday morning, I took the samples to Western New Mexico University and met with someone from the science department. They directed me to the department head, who was pleased to help. I handed over some business cards and offered a 10% discount to anyone working on the samples. He seemed grateful. "I'm considering replacing my Camry. I might check out your cars. If nothing catches my eye, I'll work with you to find something," I said. "Thank you. I'll keep that in mind," he replied. Leaving the university, I managed to smile, but anxiety lingered. The test results could mark the end of my marriage. Mentioning new cars to Emily was just a cover for my troubled thoughts. Still, the idea of getting a new car was starting to appeal to me. I called Paul, my accountant and occasional salesperson, into my office and outlined my plans. "We're going to make this work," I said with resolve. "There's something else, Paul. I want to clear the mortgage on my house. Can we arrange a lump sum payment?" "Let me run the numbers and get back to you after lunch," he said, leaving my office. As Paul left, I considered contacting my lawyer for a family law referral, but decided to hold off until I had concrete evidence of infidelity. After lunch, Paul returned with the updated spreadsheet, and we discussed the next steps for both plans. The following 2 days dragged on, each moment filled with anticipation for the DNA test results. Late Wednesday evening, the department head called with the outcome and arranged to visit regarding the car. When he arrived, his expression gave away the result before he even spoke. "The samples aren't related," he confirmed. I nodded, bracing myself for the impact of the news, even though I had half expected it. He handed over the envelope with the results. "So, about that car you were interested in?" I asked. "Well, it might sound cliché, but I'm considering a sports car for my 50th birthday, a Mazda Miata. If you don't have one in stock, I'd appreciate it if you could look for a well-maintained one at the auction tomorrow," he said. I promised to keep an eye out and call him with updates. I informed Anna that I might leave early, but would be reachable if needed. I knew she rarely needed my help. She handled most tasks herself. As I drove around the city, everything felt different. I called my lawyer, who, though saddened by the news, referred me to a trusted colleague. After the call, I scheduled an evening appointment. The next day, over a snack at a restaurant, I reflected on the past 15 years. Had I truly wasted them? Even though I still thought of Sophie as my child, biologically, she wasn't mine. I couldn't pretend ignorance anymore. I had known before, but now, there was no turning back. One thing was certain. Tom would face consequences. It didn't matter that he had been my closest friend. With friends like him, enemies seemed preferable. Emily would also face repercussions. I wondered if she knew Sophie wasn't biologically mine. Even if she didn't, she had kept this truth hidden from me. The betrayal from my supposed friend Tom and Emily's deceit weighed heavily on me. Anger began to rise within me, and before it consumed me, I knew I needed solitude. I should have called Emily to let her know I wouldn't be home that evening. Going home was not an option. I feared I might do something that would land me in jail. I dialed her number. "Hello, Mark?" She answered. "Hey, I'll be staying the night in Albuquerque to prepare for the auction tomorrow at 8, I said. "Oh, okay then. Have a safe trip," she replied, her tone flat. I rarely went to Albuquerque for auctions, so this was unusual. I wondered if she would take advantage of my absence. She'd need an excuse for my parents regarding Sophie, which wouldn't be easy. Meanwhile, I planned to keep an eye on her phone tracker throughout the evening to see if she went anywhere unusual. I drove to Albuquerque with the goal of purchasing at least 20 cars, including a Mazda Miata. I planned to arrange their pickup and delivery to my lot after the auction. My immediate challenge was finding someone reliable for mechanical inspections. Tom would be the last person I'd use for this job. He'd likely see dollar signs and inflate his fees once he learned I had a large number of cars. I needed a local auction dealer's recommendation for someone skilled and trustworthy to inspect the vehicles before they were shipped to our small town. I arrived in Albuquerque around 9 a.m. and checked into a Best Western. As the owner, I couldn't justify spending company funds on a high-end hotel. The room was simple but comfortable, perfect for my needs. As soon as I settled in, I checked Emily's phone tracker and saw she was still at home, or at least her phone was. Sleep was elusive that night. My mind was consumed with thoughts of her affair and the motivation behind it. How could she justify her actions, especially on our wedding day, and continue them for so long? I began to reassess our marriage. It had never been perfect, but I had believed in our exclusive commitment. Now, I saw it as a mistake from the start. The initial years after the wedding were rocky. We hadn't planned for a baby right away. Our plan was to wait 3 to 4 years. We had agreed on having 3 children, but Sophie's early arrival threw those plans off course. Discovering that my best friend was behind this disruption made all the struggles seem pointless. 14 years of effort felt wasted, despite the good times we'd had, overshadowed by this revelation. If Emily hadn't been involved with Tom, perhaps her pregnancy would have been less difficult, and we might have had more children. Tom's betrayal, seducing my future wife on our wedding day, and continuing to entertain her at least twice a month, was unforgivable. I had to take action. Lying in bed, anger simmered within me, and I knew I needed to calm down to avoid a sleepless night. I turned on the TV and watched a mindless comedy. The laughter helped soothe my nerves, and by 11 I was ready to sleep, preparing for a busy day ahead. The auction went smoothly. I managed to secure some excellent cars at good prices and networked with dealers in Albuquerque. Although I didn't find any Miatas at the auction, 2 dealers had one each, a red and a black. I negotiated potential deals, awaiting confirmation of my client's preferred color. Both dealers agreed to handle the transactions once I provided details of the cars on my lot. I regretted not attending this auction more frequently. Interacting with industry peers inspired me to expand my operations and provided a welcome distraction from my personal troubles. Later, during my meeting with the lawyer, the news was discouraging. I faced the prospect of losing half of my assets, along with alimony and child support payments for a child who wasn't biologically mine. In that moment, I decided against pursuing a divorce. Instead, I resolved to leave Emily with Tom's child, pay off the mortgage on the house, and let her stay there. With the mortgage solely in my name, she wouldn't be able to sell the house. I'd continue covering taxes and utilities while living elsewhere, preventing her from claiming the house as her own. However, I needed to address the business. Even though it was a registered corporation, I had a nagging feeling that without proper protection, I could risk losing it. Consulting my business lawyer became a priority. Returning home, I was exhausted from the day's demands. I told Emily I was beat and planned to shower and go to bed. "Want dinner?" she asked. "No, had a late lunch," I replied. At least she cared enough to ask. The shower was a relief, almost as if it washed away some of my troubles. Although problems persisted, I found solace in planning solutions. Minutes after hitting the pillow, sleep came easily. The past week had been stressful, but with a plan in place, I finally felt some mental relief. I woke up early, feeling refreshed, and headed to the office before Emily and Sophie stirred. Amid spreadsheets and financial reports, I coordinated my next steps. I briefed Paul on the 23 car purchases and instructed Anna to stop assigning work to Tom, stressing the need for discretion. She looked at me curiously. "You're the boss," she said. "Thank you, Anna. I appreciate your help." At 9 a.m., I called my business lawyer for advice. "Your business is registered, but she might still force a sale to claim half its value. You might consider selling preemptively," he suggested. "I can't do that. It's my life's work," I retorted. "Let me think it over and get back to you by the end of the week," he said. The news hit me hard. I had poured my sweat and tears into building my business, treating it almost like raising a child. Unlike Sophie, I thought bitterly. The anger threatened to overtake me again, but as a seasoned businessman, I knew how to compartmentalize. I refocused on my agenda. First on my list was contacting Doug. "Doug, this is Mark Kowalski. I've got some intel on two Miatas you might be interested in, one red and one black." "Still interested?" I asked. "If the price is right," he replied. "Which color do you prefer?" "Let me show you both, and we'll work out the numbers afterward. Even if we can't agree, I can sell them easily," I assured him. "And your pick?" Doug asked. "Red makes a bold statement but fades faster. Black is elegant but heats up quickly here. Planning to garage it?" I inquired. "Yes," Doug confirmed. "Then it's red. When can we meet?" "Monday or Tuesday," Doug suggested. "Perfect. Call me when you arrive." "Deal," Doug agreed. After ending the call, I dialed the dealer with the red Miata to negotiate a swap. He showed interest in the BMW I had on my lot, which had been sitting there for 3 months. Recognizing its better prospects in a larger city, he was willing to make the trade. Meanwhile, Tom showed up with several cars still awaiting repairs. Although my anger toward him simmered, his flexibility as an independent contractor suited my needs. Overhearing salesmen discussing the arrival of 23 cars, Tom asked, "Hey Mark, when are these cars from the auction coming in? I want to plan my repairs." "The auction house will handle the delivery, probably late next week or early the following," I told him tersely. Struggling to remain calm in his presence, I managed a chuckle as he left. That weekend, I kept my distance from Emily, focusing on yard work and errands. I no longer cared about tracking her phone. My contempt for her was all-consuming. Raising another man's child felt like an unforgivable betrayal. On Monday, I returned to the car show. I arranged the trade of the BMW for the Miata and set off for Albuquerque to finalize the deal. "We'll grab lunch when you arrive," the dealer suggested. I informed Anna of my day-long absence, instructing her to hold down the fort. "Got it, boss," she affirmed, her reliability evident. A raise was in order for her. The trip and lunch were pleasant, and I forged a new camaraderie with the dealer. Driving back in the Miata with the wind tousling my hair, I savored the feeling of freedom. Deciding to indulge further, I resolved to procure a black car as well. I realized a two-seater was all I needed. When I pulled into the driveway in the fiery red sports car, Emily and Sophie came outside to see it. "Why do you need this car, honey? We need something with a back seat for Sophie," Emily remarked condescendingly. "Just picked it up from Albuquerque for a client. Thought you might want to take a ride," I responded. "No, honey, I'm not a fan of small cars," Emily retorted with a hint of disdain. "Sophie, come here," I called to my daughter. "No, Dad, I'm already teased enough because of my last name. I don't want to be seen with a Polish used car salesman," she said sharply. Her words stung, typical of a teenager's bluntness. I was taken aback. Where did this disrespect come from? Emily's indifference to Sophie's remark made me question the authenticity of my family life. I announced, "I'm going for another drive. I'll be back soon," and shifted the car into reverse. Frustrated, I drove around Silver City, returning home around 9:30 p.m. I went straight upstairs, took a quick shower, and crawled into bed. When Emily didn't hear the shower running, she came into the room and shone a bright light in my eyes. I squinted and closed my eyes. "Are you sulking because we didn't choose a sports car? Aren't you going to spend time with your family? You're not just Polish, you're childish," she chided. Her sudden change in attitude puzzled me. I couldn't shake the feeling that Tom's influence was behind it. Spending time with him had seemingly fed her disregard for my heritage, which now seemed to be passed on to our daughter. Even though I supported Sophie, I needed to accept that she wasn't biologically mine. "Looks like you and your daughter would rather do without a pole around, so you might as well just leave," I retorted heatedly. Her attitude only fueled my anger. She would regret treating me this way. From then on, the atmosphere in the Kowalski household grew cold and silent. The following day, I contacted Doug, who came over to inspect the Miata. He was thrilled with it. After discussing the numbers, he was pleased with the deal he got. $3,000 less than Kelly Blue Book. As he finished the paperwork, he mentioned, "My best friend handles purchasing for the university, and we rotate about 16 cars every 2 years. It might not be much, but could you speak with him?" "Always happy to do business and ensure he gets a good deal," I replied. "I'll have Jim reach out to you by the end of the week." "Thank you," Doug said. That's how I expanded my business, by treating people well and showing appreciation for their referrals. On Wednesday, my lawyer called. "Hey Mark, I think I have a solution to your potential issue. Can you swing by this afternoon to discuss it?" Absolutely. I was eager to get things rolling. The atmosphere at home was unbearable, a pressure cooker on the brink of explosion. At the meeting later that day, I was introduced to the plan and found it satisfying. It would take about 2 weeks to execute, but the potential payoff justified the wait. During those 2 weeks, I secretly shifted my personal belongings and tools to a nearby apartment, all while Tom awaited the influx of vehicles for repairs. I kept stalling him, buying time. Over the weekend, I tackled yard work and decluttered my closet, carefully avoiding Emily and Sophie's notice. Emily did the laundry during the week, so she wouldn't catch on to the emptiness in my closet. Monday night, when I told Emily I was leaving, her rudeness and disrespect were palpable. Her derogatory comments about me being Polish and a used car salesman stung more than usual. In the past, I'd retreat to a motel for a night or two, depending on my mood. But this time, I had a different plan. The next Tuesday morning, I arrived at the parking lot early and gathered my employees for the weekly meeting. I started with my usual greeting, masking the real news I was about to drop. "Good morning, everyone. As you know, the new cars arrived yesterday. They've been inspected and are ready for sale. We won't need Tom's services anymore. If he asks, just tell him we're going in a different direction." My voice cracked slightly as I continued. "You've all been amazing. You're like family to me, and that makes this announcement tough. I've sold the business." The room fell silent. My employees looked at me, stunned. "But don't worry, nothing changes about your roles, except Anna will take on some of my responsibilities, and we'll get a raise for it." Despite their shock, congratulations for Anna began to flow. She had earned it, and everyone recognized that. "Anna, please see me after the meeting. We have some details to discuss," I said, wanting to give her a heads up about the transition. "I'll still be involved, but only in an advisory capacity, and may occasionally handle some sales. I don't want to interfere with your work," I assured everyone. Relief washed over them as they realized I'd still be around, even if just occasionally. After the meeting, as everyone filed out, Tom was waiting by the door. "Hey, why wasn't I included in the meeting?" he asked, looking confused. "It was a staff meeting, and you're not on the payroll," I replied, trying to sound neutral. Tom looked taken aback. "I see the cars have arrived. I'll start working on them." "No need. They've already been prepped for sale," I said firmly. His expression turned to shock. "But I always check the cars," he protested. "Not anymore. The business has been sold, and the new owner wants to take things in a different direction," I told him, struggling to keep my composure. My anger was simmering, but I kept it controlled. "I can't believe you sold the business," Tom muttered, focusing on his own disappointment. "What now?" "You can collect your check for the past 2 weeks. It's a modest amount. Anna didn't need much of your work," I said bluntly. He was expecting more work, but that was no longer his concern. I felt a grim satisfaction in denying him further opportunities. I wanted to tell him exactly what I thought of him, but I kept my feelings in check. When I spoke with Anna, I asked her to keep our conversation confidential. "Of course, Mark. I'll keep everything to myself," she assured me. "I've set up new companies in Nevada. One bought the parking lot, the other bought the business. I own all the shares in both. I plan to divorce Emily, but I need to keep paying the utilities and taxes on our house so she can't claim abandonment. I don't want her to get her hands on the business. That's why the sale involved two companies. Let them figure it out. The proceeds will be spent by the time she gets the divorce finalized. Plus, I barely make anything from consulting and a few commissions. Anna, you'll handle daily operations. I'll be available for questions, but I trust you completely. Anna smiled at the news of the new ownership, but grew serious when I mentioned Emily and Tom. Her respect and admiration for me were clear. I need you to order a new sign and letterhead. The business name will be Helpless Car. This will make it clear to Tom and Emily that the business is under new management, I explained. I spelled out the new name for clarity. Anna looked puzzled. I'll explain the name choice later. For now, just know it symbolizes the change, I said. With that, I said my goodbyes and left. I drove my Audi toward Albuquerque, feeling a mix of relief and anticipation. About 2 hours later, my phone rang. It was Emily. I hadn't expected her to call so soon. This was a familiar cycle. I'd leave, she'd call, we'd talk, and I'd come back. Things would momentarily change, then revert to their old patterns. Another argument would ensue, and the cycle would start again. I answered the call, curious about what she had to say this time. Hello? I answered through the car's speakerphone. Mark, what's going on? Emily's voice was tinged with uncertainty. Nothing much, just heading to Albuquerque, I replied, keeping my voice flat and unemotional. Why Albuquerque? Emily asked, her tone laced with curiosity. To pick up a car, I said, showing no hint of emotion. So what I heard must not be true. Tom must have called you, figuratively speaking. Maybe he asked your mistress about you, she speculated, trying to piece things together. I don't know, I responded simply. What did you hear? She pressed, clearly anxious. Tom called and said you sold the business, Emily revealed. Why would he call you? I questioned, puzzled by her knowledge. He's your best friend. He was curious if I knew, she corrected herself. Best friend? What a joke, I scoffed internally. Tom was never a true friend, just someone who viewed me as a punchline, another clueless guy being played. Yes, I sold the business. Now you won't have to deal with the stigma of being married to a used car salesman. Shouldn't we have discussed this first? She asked, her concern for our future bleeding through. This is my company. I owned it before we got married, and I can sell it whenever I want. I hope the new owner treats the employees well, I said firmly, dismissing her worry. Did you get a good price for it? She fretted, clearly concerned about her lifestyle. I needed a change. I'll start job hunting after a break, I said, indifferent to her concerns. What about the mortgage? She panicked. I used the proceeds to pay off the house. You'll only need to cover utilities and taxes now, I explained. What about food, gas, insurance? She almost shouted, her voice on the verge of hysteria. Guess I overlooked those. Maybe you could work more hours, I suggested coldly. When are you coming home? She demanded, sounding desperate. I won't be coming back, I said, my tone casual and detached. Remember what you said when I left. Don't worry, I'll figure out how to cover the bills. You can't do this, Mark. You need to come back, she pleaded, desperation clear in her voice. No, I really don't want to, I responded with finality. Mark, please don't do this, she cried, her voice breaking. I've made my decision, I said, unmoved. What about your daughter? She tried to appeal to my emotions. You mean Sophie? The girl who's embarrassed by her last name and the fact that her father was a used car salesman? I retorted harshly. She's just a 13-year-old girl. You can't take this personally, she said. Well, it doesn't matter anymore. I won't be back, so none of you will have to be embarrassed by me, I said. And with that, I ended the call and turned off my phone, leaving her to process the situation. I knew she'd try calling me again and grow frustrated when I didn't answer. I tried to enjoy the drive to Albuquerque, focusing on the road and the freedom it represented. I assumed Emily's next move would be to contact Tom and share what I'd said. Upon reaching my destination, I turned my phone back on and saw 5 missed messages. 3 from Emily, 1 from Tom, and 1 from Anna. I immediately called Anna back. Hi, Anna. Sorry for the delay. My phone was off. I've been getting a lot of unwanted calls, I explained. Yes, I know. Emily and Tom called me trying to find out where you are. I told them you don't own the place anymore, so you won't be coming back. I hope everything is okay, Anna informed me. Great. If they hassle you again, just tell them you'll report them for harassment, I suggested. I like that, she said. Mark, even though it feels like you don't have any family or friends left, remember that you do. We're your family now and always will be. Thank you, Anna. You always know the right thing to say, I said, feeling a genuine appreciation for her support. I hope your husband realizes how lucky he is, I remarked. He does. He tells me all the time. Never take that for granted, she assured me. I won't, I promised. After ending the call, I debated whether to call Emily or Tom. In the end, I decided to let them stew and handle things on their own. I exited the Audi and went into the parking lot office where the owner was waiting. I have that Audi I mentioned. Interested in discussing a swap? I proposed. Let's take a look, he said. He admired the car's condition and seemed impressed. This is a great ride. I could probably sell it in a week. Are you sure about the exchange? Feels like you're getting the better deal. I'm not here to profit. Just want a sports car, I replied. 30 minutes later, I was back on the road, the top down and the wind in my hair, savoring the ride. I decided to head north, towards Santa Fe. Over the next 2 weeks, I traveled through northern New Mexico, Arizona, southern Utah, and Colorado, staying close enough in case Anna needed anything. I checked in with her a few times, and once everything seemed settled, I continued west. Of course, the calls continued. Initially, there was annoyance, followed by apologies, and then hints of resentment. I listened, but shrugged off their attempts to reach me. When they reported my credit card as canceled, I couldn't help but laugh. Tom even called, branding me a villain for leaving Emily and Sophie. I chuckled some more. My lawyer texted me about Emily's threats of legal action if I didn't return. I called him back. Hello, Mark speaking. So your wife's making threats? He asked. Yes, but as long as you're still paying on the house, she'll have a hard time proving anything. I'm not concerned, I assured him. I have something better for you. I've got a recording where I declare my departure, and she insists I don't come back. It's solid evidence, I offered. Send it over. If she causes any trouble, I'll take it to her lawyer, he said. I'll check in next week to see how things are going. I roamed the Southwest in the Miata. It wasn't the most comfortable ride, but it was enjoyable. I felt a sense of liberation and contentment as I continued my journey. The Miata wasn't the coziest ride, but it was exhilarating. I caught a few glances and even some flirty flashes from middle-aged women along the way, but I wasn't interested. After all, I was still technically married, regardless of how things had turned out. I drove through Reno, Lake Tahoe, the coast, Napa Valley, and zigzagged along Highway 1, Yosemite, San Diego, Death Valley, Vegas, and finally Phoenix. No rush, just enjoying the journey. During my travels, I chatted with people in parking lots. Many envied a guy in his 30s who could just hit the road without a second thought. After covering 8,000 miles in about 3 months, I decided it was time to return to Silver City. When I arrived at Helpless Auto, my team greeted me warmly. They were genuinely happy to see me back, and I was pleasantly surprised by a few new faces. I walked into Anna's office, now hers, and she looked up, her smile widening as she saw me. She got up, walked around her desk, and gave me a tight hug. After catching up for a bit, I asked, "Do you think I can treat everyone to food and drinks at Wrangler's? Can you close the store by 5? It's already 3, but absolutely. I'll make sure the whole team is there," she promised. I bade everyone farewell, announced our get-together in 2 hours, and left them in high spirits. Next, I visited my lawyer. He updated me on Emily's attempt to claim abandonment and seize my assets, which he had successfully blocked. We discussed our next steps. At 5, I joined the team at Wrangler's. We had a fantastic dinner, and it was great catching up with everyone. As the evening wound down, people started to leave, leaving only Anna and me. "You know, Mark," Anna said, looking at me thoughtfully, "you might feel powerless and lost, but you're mistaken. You just put your trust in the wrong people." I met her gaze. "So you figured it out?" "Yes," she nodded. "It took some time, but your mention of the new name lingered in my mind until I understood. You may be Polish, but those jokes never defined who you are. They were insults to your heritage and who you are as a person." "Thank you, Anna. You're the main reason I came back. I needed to see how you handled my responsibilities. I'm pleased to say you haven't just filled my shoes. You've forged your own path." "I had an exceptional mentor," she said, her gratitude evident. We embraced, and then she left to join her husband, who looked genuinely content. I headed back to the apartment I hadn't seen in 3 months. The air was stale, so I opened the windows to let the fresh evening breeze in. Grabbing a beer, I settled on the terrace overlooking the pool. A few people were swimming, and a family was enjoying themselves nearby. My thoughts drifted to Emily and me, reflecting on the lofty dreams we once had when we got married. Now, those dreams seemed distant. Glancing at the wall clock, I noted it was around 8:30. A realization hit me. It was time for a confrontation. I rose, hopped into my Miata, and drove to my house. Technically, it was still mine, as I had purchased it before marrying Emily, and my name was the only one on the deed. As I pulled into the driveway, disappointment washed over me. The yard was overgrown, indicating neglect. The porch light was on, suggesting Emily was home. I approached the door and knocked. Sophie answered, her eyes widening in surprise. "Dad?" "Hi, Sophie. Is your mom home?" I asked. She hesitated before calling out, "Mother!" From the kitchen, I heard Emily's tense, high-pitched voice. "What's the matter?" Emily asked, rounding the corner. Her eyes widened as she spotted me, and she shrieked, "Where are you going?" "I'm traveling," I said evenly. Just then, Tom emerged from the bedroom, wearing only his underwear. "Oh, look at that. The whole family's here," I remarked. Emily's confusion turned to anger. "What are you talking about?" "I guess Tom has stepped in to fill my role after all," I said. Emily looked perplexed, while Sophie's anger was palpable. "Actually, young lady, you seem to be misinformed," I said, knowing how much Emily disliked being corrected. "Tom never worked for me by his own choice, so I couldn't have fired him." Emily interrupted. "What about the bills? Utilities and car insurance are covered, but what about groceries and gas? You had a job. Did you lose it? Do you think you can just waltz back in and take over?" "No, I'm not taking over. I'll wait until you and your partner find somewhere else to live," I said, noticing that Sophie seemed surprisingly comfortable with the situation. "I'm not leaving my home," Emily insisted. "Correction, this is my home. It was mine before we married, and my name is the only one on the deed," I said firmly. "You left, so now he's mine," Emily argued. "That's not how the law works," I countered. "As long as I'm covering utilities and taxes, I remain the legal owner. Even though I've been away, it's still mine. I'll give you until the end of next month to find a new place. Just make sure you take your daughter with you." "What do you mean, your daughter?" Emily protested. "She's our daughter," Emily snapped. "You couldn't have put it more accurately," I chuckled. Emily looked confused, while Sophie stared in shock. "Sophie, I know you don't like being called Polish, so here's some news. Your real father isn't me. It's Tom." Silence enveloped the room. Emily's voice trembled as she whispered, "What?" "Yes, Emily. It seems your carelessness on our wedding day resulted in a child, but not mine," I said, letting the truth sink in. "However, there was a silver lining for you, Sophie. You can now take your real father's last name and simply be Sophie. I wonder if maybe Mom chose that name out of some twisted homage to her lover," I mused aloud. Emily and Tom exchanged uneasy glances, the color draining from Tom's face. "What about you, Tom? Don't you want to step up and be a father now?" I pressed. "Well, that's a bit too late now. But look on the bright side. It's just 4 more years until college," I said, trying to add a hint of sarcasm. Emily and Tom both recoiled in shock. "I don't believe this," they stammered almost in unison. With a swift motion, I handed them the DNA report. "Go ahead and read it for yourselves." They snatched the report, their eyes darting over the words before their faces crumpled in disbelief. "Sophie, let your mom and her new partner know that they'll be served with divorce papers next week, along with an eviction notice," I said, turning on my heel and walking away. During my travels, the question that gnawed at me was whether this affair had been a constant during our marriage. Was I just a convenient pawn in Emily's game? The betrayal stung deeply, and I felt lost and exposed. Tom had made jokes about my background and mocked me behind my back. Back at the apartment, I drowned my sorrows in beer. The next morning, I met with my lawyer to kickstart the divorce process. Despite knowing I'd have to sell the house and split the proceeds, the silver lining was that I wouldn't owe alimony or child support, given the circumstances. At least that was my hope. Rebuilding trust with anyone, whether man or woman, felt like an insurmountable task. Therapy might be something to consider. As the divorce proceedings began, I returned to work at the dealership. I made it clear to my colleagues that I was no longer the boss and only needed 1 sale per week to keep afloat, just one. When faced with court-ordered child support, I made sure my bank accounts were drained, leaving only enough for bare necessities at the end of each month. Emily hired a lawyer, though I wondered how she managed that. Maybe he was working pro bono. Regardless, they were in for a surprise. Despite their efforts to dig into my finances and the sale, they found nothing substantial. I learned that during my absence, Tom had visited the dealership almost daily, trying to secure a job from Anna. She turned him down every time, and he eventually gave up. Now, he regretted not getting his ASE certification, and his only job offer was at Valvoline, changing oil for $13 an hour. I hoped Emily would have to work full-time, or they'd struggle. I contacted the realtor and informed Emily that I was listing the house for sale. She'd need to vacate before the sale was finalized. One evening, Emily knocked on my door. Reluctantly, I let her in. "What do you want, Emily?" I asked. "Can we talk?" she pleaded. "I'm not sure it's a good idea. We're in the middle of a legal battle," I replied. "Please, Mark, just us, no lawyers. Let's have a civil conversation," she insisted. "All right, but let's go to Denny's," I suggested. I didn't trust her enough to be alone with her, and having witnesses around seemed like a good idea. At Denny's, after exchanging pleasantries, I asked, "Why, Emily?" She hesitated before answering. "I guess the simple answer is that I liked both of you and couldn't choose." "So, you were seeing both of us at the same time?" I asked. Emily looked down, admitting, "Yes, but Tom warned me not to tell you because he knew it would ruin our relationship." "Then why did you say yes when I proposed?" I pressed. "Because I loved you," she said. "And Tom?" I probed. "I loved him too, but I knew he wouldn't make a good husband," she confessed. "So, we ended things when you proposed and I focused on us and our wedding plans." "So on our wedding day, you were with him?" I asked. Emily started crying. "Yes, everything was a mess." "Then what happened with him?" I asked. Emily sobbed. "I didn't want to lose him, and he didn't want to lose me." "Well, now you have each other and your child. By the way, the name Sophie was a clever choice." "I didn't catch on until later," I said. "During my travels, I didn't realize Sophie wasn't mine." Emily looked at me, tears streaming down her face. "Mark, I still love you." "It's nice to hear, Emily, but I'm not sure you understand what love really means," I replied. "I loved you more than anything, and clearly you can't say the same," she retorted. "I loved you, but now I feel nothing but contempt," I said firmly. Emily understood that our relationship was over. There would never be an us again. Before she left, I had to ask one last question. "Have you ever stopped?" After hesitating, she admitted, "We never stopped. We had our quiet times, but we usually met twice a month." I was hoping for a different response, but at least she was honest. "One more thing. About a year ago, your behavior towards me changed. What caused it?" Her face flushed red. Then she grew slightly angry. "Tom started pushing for a bacchanalia that didn't involve you. I might have considered it if you were involved, but we couldn't figure it out. His insistence made me resent you for not being open to it." "Did you ever go through with it?" I asked. "No, I thought about it, but then you left and everything fell apart," she admitted. "Well, now you're free to pursue it. Your choices don't affect me anymore," I said. Sensing the conversation was winding down, I paid the bill and we headed to our cars. 4 months later, we stood before a judge and finalized our divorce. Tom was there too. As we exited the courthouse, Emily suggested, "Maybe we can grab a drink, the traditional way." "Certainly," I agreed. Despite the previous animosity, it had dissipated. I thought to myself, this marks the end of my association with them. They can be together now. Let them deal with their mess. They deserve each other. Ha! Emily will have to adjust to a lower standard of living. All right, maybe the resentment hasn't completely faded. Despite being Polish, I demand respect.